Hi all, this is Michael from Seagon again. And you might be asking yourself, well, why am I down here? Well, you'll find out soon enough. Today, we are covering the main muscle groups when training for hypertrophy. You might be training for hypertrophy for aesthetic reasons, then you want to make sure the aesthetic muscles pop out. Or you might be training for strength reasons, or you might be training to improve at your sport. Depending on what you are training for, you will start going into more depth in understanding what muscles do I want to specifically hypertrophy for my sport. But in general, today we're going to have a look at it from, I think, the more aesthetic point of view. So first things first, let's break down the body a bit more than just all of our muscle groups. Let's try to quickly break it down. So first of all, we have the upper half of our body, right? And then we have the lower half of our body. Look at my wonderful legs. Let's break down the lower body just because I think it's a bit easier, a bit quicker to get through. So we have the quadricep, big muscle, get that teardrop shape. Don't look at my quads. I just finished a bulk. Starting my cut now. So we have the big, nice quad. Helps us with pushing, with squatting, really adds aesthetics to the leg if that's what you're looking for. Very useful in a lot of sports, in sprinting, etc. Then we also have the gluteus maximus, that fat butt, you know, that nice thing behind you. And very, very important, helps us stand erect. It's one of the biggest muscles in the body. It helps us with power and everything else. We also have the hamstring, which is below the leg. And this is an underrated muscle, in my opinion. It adds a lot of size and strength and explosiveness to the leg, as it's a very fast twitch muscle. And yeah, well, that's the top of the leg. There are things like the abductors and adductors to be considered when looking at it, but these are kind of the general areas. The more you get into it, the more you can start breaking down muscle by muscle, but I don't necessarily think it's that useful at the beginning, especially. Then, as you noticed, I only talked about the upper side of my leg. We have the bottom of the leg, right? We have this whole area, and that can be broken down into three main areas. So one, I'm going to start with the least obvious, which are the foot muscles. So believe it or not, our feet need to get stronger sometimes. We may have weak feet, shoes, you know, this is a whole opinion thing you can go on, but the feet have their own muscles. Generally, though, not a thing that is trained a lot unless you're in the barefoot community. Then we have the front of the leg, the shin. This, in my opinion, is one of the most underrated muscles in the human body to be trained because it is something that helps stop our acceleration, so it helps our deceleration, and it can prevent tons and tons of injuries. It is not a very aesthetic muscle, I will give you that. You can train the hell out of it and get almost nowhere, but it is quite useful to be trained, especially for injury prevention. And finally, we have the calves, famous old calves, you know, this muscle right here for those few people who haven't a clue what I am talking about. Right, let's sit back down in my chair. Those are the legs, in short, right? Right, then we have the upper body. So the upper body can be broken down in a few various ways. So one is the torso and the arms, okay? So I will go over the arms first, as they are limbs similar to the legs. What do we have in the arms that we would like to train? We have the bicep, most famous muscle probably to be trained. It has two heads. There is another inner muscle that also adds to its size, but we're not talking about training the bicep right now. We're just trying to understand the human body. Then we also have the tricep on the other side that hangs down low, you know? And having a real nice tricep is a sign of massive strength. Then, so we have the upper arm mainly covered. We also have the forearm. In the forearm, we have all of the muscles that control our digits. We also have one muscle in particular that controls elbow flexion, right? So in general, this is how I've broken it down for my training, but we have the flexors, which help bring our wrist in. We have the extensors, which help lift our wrist. And then we have the brachioradialis, which is the one that helps um, elbow flexion, right? Those are the three main areas we're looking at it. The more you get into it, the more you realize the forearm is very complex. But if you want to cover most of your bases, that is a really good way to go, as they work very synchronously and they work together, right? So that is the forearm covered. We'll get more in detail as time passes, but I want to give us a nice idea. And I think that covers you, more than covers you. Oftentimes, actually, when training, you don't need to worry about the forearm. Simply gripping onto things can be plenty of work. Then, what is next? We have the torso. And I kind of want to break it down. I want us to understand this phantom word that is the core, right? First of all, and then we have the other areas that we know a little better. So the core is simply the band that goes around the middle of our body, right? It starts maybe around just below the abs and works its way up to just below the chest. So the muscles included there are the abdominals, famous for that six-pack, your obliques, and you could also consider your serratus as a part of it, but not really, which is the muscle that kind of makes your obliques pop a little extra on from your back. But you have your obliques, then you have the inner obliques, the inner muscles as well. And then we also have our sides, we have our erectors, we even have our hip flexors. But basically this general area is the core. It includes the back as well with the erectors, as I mentioned. Okay, then finally we have the chest. Well, not finally, but we have the chest with its two separate heads to be looked at. And we have the biggest muscle group, we call it. And this really shows us that the definition of muscle group is very wide, because we have chest, which is basically a two-headed muscle. And then we have the back, right? So the back can be broken down into a huge amount of muscles. I'm not going to go into depth with all of them now, but in short, we have the width of the back with the latissimus dorsi, and we have the thickness of the back with the rhomboids, the teres major, minor, etc., which gives it that kind of curviness. Then we have the traps, or the neck, which start about halfway down your back and work their way all the way up to the top, right? It can be broken down for training. It is quite useful. It is quite an aesthetic muscle. And then we have the neck as well. We have the front and the back mainly, which there is actually a bit more there than just the traps. And then finally, we have the shoulders, the cap delts. So they kind of bring together the torso and your arms. It is tended to broken down into front, side, and rear delta, as even though it is one muscle, it performs three quite distinct actions. Okay, how do you hit these? We will go over that. As you can tell, our human body is incredibly complex. However, now you have an idea of what are the main areas I'm looking at. I didn't mention too much their importance within your body, and that is because their importance depends on what you want. In fact, I failed to mention a load of muscles. There's actually hundreds of muscles within our body, and the reason is because some of them work so much in tandem it doesn't make sense to break them down, and others are very much sport specific, and we'll get into a lot more detail as time passes, but this was to give you a general idea. I hope you have a better understanding of how the body can be broken down, and subscribe to become the most performant you, and I will see you next time.